Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the weekend edition, and I know that you are going to certainly appreciate the 2 hours today, where we're going to cover lots of information. Let me say that, of course, 2 of our articles have to do today with Afghanistan, so we will talk about that for very good reasons. One about the massacre at the airport that we talked about yesterday. A second one about the decision by Nancy Pelosi and company to get out of Dodge almost instantaneously there to avoid any of the finger pointing. But then most of the other articles will be on other topics. And as I've said before, you have to be paying attention to misdirection. One of the things that Harry Houdini was able to be such a great illusionist is to misdirect you. And politicians do this as well. There have been a lot of things happening in both state legislatures and in Congress that you need to know about. So we will be talking about those issues as well. And in order to help us with all of the conversation today, we have Lathan Watts with us, Director of Public Affairs at First Liberty, as well as Dr. Merrill Matthews, resident scholar for the Institute for Policy Innovation. First article here, again, we've talked about it yesterday, but of course the death count has gone up dramatically since we talked about it. The jihadist attack on the Kabul airport that everyone feared finally happened on Thursday, killing 13 American soldiers, wounding 15, as well as killing nearly 90 Afghans and wounding dozens more. Person responsible for that, a suicide bomber, and ISIS claimed responsibility for the attack. But the question that you have to ask now is, what a position for the United States to be in, as this article says, relying on the victorious enemy, that would be the Taliban, in trying to prevent other jihadists, that would be ISIS, from killing Americans. About the worst military strategy we have possibly within the recent memory. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think at least back to the Bay of Pigs.
Yes.
I mean, this is this is as wrong as something can get. And it seems it's almost like it was done completely, almost intentionally backwards, right? Like, pull the troops out, leave the military assets, leave the guys in prison that we spent blood and treasure capturing, leave all the citizens. Pulled it like that's exactly backwards, right? Yeah. If you're going to do this, you get our citizens out, you get all of the Americans out, all of the allies that cooperated, you get them out. Then all of these guys that we have spent all these years looking for, and probably soldiers have bled and died in fighting to capture, who were not, we weren't after them for jaywalking.
That's right.
Like, these people want to kill us.
Yes,
those guys should be next. You put them on a plane to Gitmo. Then you start evacuating. Once you've got all of that done, then move the unused military cargo, the choppers, the armored personnel carriers, all of that. So you get all of that, and then the troops leave. I mean, I've never spent a day in uniform, and I can figure this out. You don't have to be an expert military strategist. I mean, I'm a history dork. I've studied military history, but it doesn't take an absolute genius to figure this out. It's just mind-boggling to me to see how poorly executed this, if you want to call it strategy, has been done.
It's been an absolute disaster on multiple fronts. So it's been a disaster for the families who ended up losing their loved ones, 13 service members. It's been a disaster for the Afghan people, especially those who worked with us and now have been trying to get out. And it has been, in most of all, in a sense, a disaster for Joe Biden and his foreign policy. Nobody defends this now except the paid people in the White House who are forced to defend it. And the media has, I don't want to quite say turned on him, but are certainly have had their eyes open now about this. And Joe Biden, he keeps coming forward and trying to speak. He needs to stop doing that because he does nothing but make it worse for himself. Right. Because he contradicts himself every day.
And again, when you have individuals, and I don't think I've seen this too often. Of course, Dr. Merrill Matthews, you've been to Washington, D.C. and testified a lot more than anybody else around the table. But I can't think of a time in which, after the president speaks, a cabinet officer gives up and contradicts the president almost instantaneously because the information is so wrong, and the comments that are coming from the press are going to be so damaging that they actually have to contradict him, sometimes minutes after he's actually spoken.
Well, I think it was just yesterday that he said, I'm a great student of history, and you never have an end of a conflict where these things are going on and things work out really smoothly. But it was just a day or two ago that he said, we're going to have everybody out. This is going to go well. We're going to get them out. You know, it's mind-boggling how badly this has been done. And then he keeps trying to go back and for some sense or the other blame Donald Trump for it. Donald Trump gave us the May 1st deadline. We pushed it past that. Well, you've changed everything else Donald Trump has done. Why this? Unless the Supreme Court stopped you from changing it, as we've seen on a few things. But why not this? If you need more time, and so by April, he said yesterday, I think it was, they knew they needed more time. Why didn't you start the process then? Why did you wait till just the last few weeks? Well, and now he wants credit for trying to get everybody out. It's like, I destroyed the shop. Please help me give me credit for trying to get it cleaned up.
Yeah, he keeps saying, well, the previous president made this deal and I'm bound by it. No, you're not. Make a new deal. You're the president. If you don't like the deadline, you set a new one. And he did originally. So everybody's going to be out by September 11th. Can't imagine how they picked that date. Yeah. This is the absolute triumph of style over substance. Yes. This is, we set a date. Here's September 11th, 20th anniversary. I want to be the guy that said, Trump said he was getting us out. I want to be the guy who actually did get us out. Okay, don't bother me with the details of how it's going to happen. And then when something comes up, yeah, well, I was handcuffed by the deal that the other guy made. No, you're not.
Yes. Since when were you handcuffed on a Keystone XL pipeline or the issues of the border or anything else? I mean, it is an
absolute disaster for Joe Biden's presidency and the notion he's been going around saying, I'm the foreign policy expert here. Believe me, I know what I'm doing here. And then the only thing saving him is people don't want him anymore, but they also don't want Kamala. So getting him out, you're getting up with Kamala.
When we come back from the break, I also want to point out the fact, as you did, that the press has been uncharacteristically critical of him, and that has been a surprise for the Biden administration. And you can, in some cases, come to different opinions about some things that are gray, but you can't come to different opinions about, for example, how many Americans were in Afghanistan, how many have been brought out, and how many are still left. And I want to go through those numbers just for a little bit to show you that I think even though we're still hearing from time to time that mathematics is racist, I think most of us have believed that mathematics is still somewhat objective. And it has been the Washington Post of all who have just been unbelievably critical of the fact that every day you give us a different set of numbers. Now, it sounds kind of like COVID, but we'll get into that in just a minute. And so when we come back, we'll get into that and also the implications of some of this. Does this affect our relevance to everything from fighting the war on terrorism to our relationship with NATO? There's a lot more to cover. We'll do that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
A frequent phrase used these days is that we need to trust the science, but I found that often trust the science really means trust the model, which is not the same thing. Computer models are used to predict everything from the climate to the economy. Often they are inaccurate. Asking legitimate questions about these models and their assumptions is appropriate and not anti-science. When I was in graduate school, many of us worked with professors who developed computer models attempting to understand more about the environment. These models helped me learn two valuable lessons. First, you need good data for the model to accurately predict the future. No doubt you've seen the word GIGO, which stands for garbage in, garbage out. If the data you have for a pandemic model comes from China or Iran, you may not have good data. Second, a good model also needs to be based upon accurate assumptions. If you can't account for the impact of mitigation procedures, you're going to come to scary conclusions about the infection rate and the death rate. Should we have skepticism about the models used to predict the future? Well, the climate models that were developed back in the 1990s predicted rising temperatures. Instead, we had a warming hiatus that lasted for nearly a decade and a half. Global temperatures essentially remain flat. The Congressional Budget Office is given the responsibility of estimating the impact of legislation on federal revenue, but often is limited in the assumptions they can use. For example, if a tax reform bill reduces taxes, the CBO score assumes that lower taxes mean lower tax revenue. But individual investors and consumers react to lower taxes by investing more and spending more. Lower taxes might actually generate more revenue. Often, trust the science really means trust the model, but we have lots of evidence that sometimes the models are wrong. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you hear on Viewpoints by visiting pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation at any point, 1-800-351-1212. Weekend edition, Lathan Watts, Dr. Merrill Matthews. And let me just give a few of the numbers, because what you find out is that we really don't know what the numbers are. I'm not sure the United States government knows what the numbers are, but if you start looking at some of the hard numbers, let's just take the Pentagon briefing just the other day. They said that nearly 64,000 people have been evacuated from the Kabul airport. Now, of those 64,000, as best as the Pentagon can determine, over about 4,000 of those people are American citizens. Well, if you do the math, that means that just a little over 6% of the total evacuees out of Afghanistan are Americans. Now, that can't be right. So then you start saying, well, okay, you have the Daily Caller, for example, quoting from an internal government figure suggesting that as many as 5,200, so 5,200 Americans could be stranded. Now, you can't use the word stranded, I found out from Jed Sankey, right? Okay. Left behind, whatever phrase we want to use, after August 31st. And that's the internal government document. And that has been confirmed, by the way, by a mission by two members of Congress, one from Massachusetts, who's a Democrat, one from Michigan, who's a Republican, who went over there. Nancy Pelosi was very upset that they went over there, but they've been able to validate that as well. Lathan Watts, I don't think the government really knows who is over there, and there is every piece of evidence to suggest that we will not meet the August 31st deadline. And what happens then? Do we have hostages? I don't know.
I think we will, and I think you're right. I don't think they know how many people are there. I think that's why you get all these conflicting numbers, and which is inexcusable in in a place like Afghanistan, I hesitate to call it a country because it's not. Okay, it's not how we think of, a political. It's not a country.
Yes.
Okay, it's just not.
You just look at the pictures of the airport the other day and you go,
right.
That's an airport?
Now, I would say, if you as an American went over there for some reason and did not let the embassy know that you were there, I mean, that's...
Yeah, and some of these are contractors and security and all sorts of stuff that may not have registered.
But, I mean, I think you're exactly right. I don't think they have any idea how many Americans are there, and I think that, all, just like you said, all signs indicate we are not going to be complete by August 31st. And what happens then under this administration is it's apparently up to the Taliban what happens then. The president says we're going to go after these people that just detonated the suicide bomb at the airport. Well, how are you going to do that while you're in the process of pulling all the military assets out? Who's going to be left to go after these people? And since you abandon all that military hardware, if you do go after these people, they're likely going to be much better armed than they would have been before.
Yes.
It sounds like a broken record, but it's just, I'm astonished at what a disaster this is. I wasn't around for the Bay of Pigs, right?
Yeah.
But there's
Some
been
of us old guys were.
there have been military
Yes.
blunders throughout history. Commanders in chief have made really bad decisions. He's not the first, okay, but this is one of the worst that I've ever been around to watch. And where it will rank in history, we'll leave that for another conversation, I guess. But it has geopolitical implications. It has implications for our allies as to whether or not we can be trusted as an ally. We'll get to that in a minute. Yeah. I'm sure
China's picked up on that with Taiwan and saying, you think the U.S. is going to protect you from us if we attack? They sort of do it subtly, but just look at Afghanistan and see what you think. So is that really going to be the case?
Yeah.
And then, of course, one group I've concerned about, we haven't talked about, I don't know that there's a lot of Christians in Afghanistan.
But I suspect some.
I think there are some Afghan Christians.
There absolutely are.
And whereas the Taliban may have sort of made promises that they won't hurt American citizens, we don't know that we can trust that.
Right.
I don't know that they would have made any promises that they would not kill Afghan Christians who are there at some parts and I suspect they probably know who those people are because they've been Christians in various parts of the country for a while. Some of them may already have been killed.
And again, they would check the cell phone and there was a Bible app on it. They killed them right there. So we do know what's going on there. To underscore what Lathan said just a minute ago, this comes from Nathan Sales. You might say, who's he? Well, he was actually a counterterrorism expert. And he said, when I first heard that about the president saying we're going to hunt them down and make them pay, my first reaction was spot on. My second reaction is, with what assets? Mm-hmm. How in the world do you think you're going to go after these people if indeed you're leaving? Now, that's led to some individuals ranging from Senator Sass from Nebraska to, of course, the Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell saying, well, we need to put some more military in there, which may be necessary, but that's just exactly the opposite of the promise, I think, that Joe Biden made right now with the Taliban.
Right, and we did go in and do a hit on in Pakistan on Osama bin Laden.
Yeah.
But remember, we tried to do this to go into Iran and capture and retake our the people they captured there, and they were holding as hostage, and that was a disaster. I think Ross Perot, if I remember right, was sort of behind that, but it was a disaster. It didn't work at all.
Again, Osama bin Laden, of course, the Taliban leader Mullah Omar, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, ISIS, Soleimani. So let's be giving credit where credit was due. One or two from Obama, quite a number from Trump. But the bottom line is, will we ever be able to do that again unless we fly some drones in with a lot of intelligence that allow us to take those individuals out?
And the problem there, of course, then is we oftentimes had some kind of access to this. And now I'm just looking at a map of Afghanistan, and it's surrounded a large border with Iran on its west side. Iran is working on nuclear stuff. Does that end up being, are they able to move things back and forth? It's got a small border with China in the northwest. So you can sort of use Afghanistan now as a way to move things
do it.
through. And then you got Pakistan on the south, and you got three of the stands, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan on the north. I don't know what's going on in those countries, but the point is, you've got Afghanistan now becomes a landlocked haven for all kinds of criminal activity, perhaps nuclear development and other things that we just simply don't know about because we don't have the forces on the ground to be able to see that or stop it.
And now that when we used to have a base there, we could at least kind of monitor terrorist activities in the stand countries to, of course, the west, Iran, and to the east, in terms of Pakistan. We lose that now and we go all the way back to the Gulf, basically.
This is why we went there in the first place.
Right.
I understand.
This is why we had a presence there, because this is where 9/11 started. Okay, you had a terrorist haven, people who were safe to sit around and plan really bad things and execute them, and they did. And it was an absolute false choice that Biden said that he had. He sets up these straw man arguments like, well, I'm not going to have us in this endless war. We hadn't been at war in Afghanistan in years. We recognized the reality on the ground.
Right.
And that is, you need intelligence assets there and a small number of special forces so that when the intelligence assets identify the guys who are trying to kill us, our guys go kill them.
Yeah.
In their backyard, not ours.
Right.
And to say that you can maintain a base for that purpose there, same reason we still got a base in Korea, same reason we still got bases in Japan, we still got bases in Europe, is not to say that we are going to be in an endless war in Afghanistan. He set up that false choice and then tried to blame Trump for backing him into this corner when he clearly didn't have to be.
Well, we need to take a break, and I'm already starting to get phone calls. And so when we come back, I want to talk about NATO. But first, I see one of our callers raises a question I mentioned yesterday, but let's get back to it just before we take the break. We had just the other day 9,000 Afghan refugees that arrived at Dulles International Airport. Now, again, most of them probably very decent people, really want to enjoy the freedom that they have here. Many of them actually come from almost an Afghani middle class, where some of them actually are fairly well educated. But in the midst of that, can we seriously around this table believe that all of them were adequately vetted? Unless you think I'm being overly critical, there was a great interview just happened the other day of an individual who actually had been in Afghanistan and had a trusted translator that they had used for years, and they got taken into an ambush and found out it was this trusted translator that everybody trusted that actually had tipped off the Taliban. So you have to understand that when you bring in thousands and thousands of people and then you leave it to the administration, the Biden administration, to vet them, maybe not the best. So one of the callers wants to get into that, and then we'll talk about the impact on NATO and much more right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition. If you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. And again, we have Lathan Watts and Dr. Merrill Matthews. Let's go to Arizona, KNLB. Martha, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thanks for taking the call, Kerby. So I heard what you said before the break about, and that was my question, how are we vetting these people that we're bringing over from Afghanistan? If the majority of them are not American citizens. And then also, what do we do with them if they come here and we realize these are not good people? As you were saying in one of the things you wrote about Muslim religion, you increase the percentage of the population that's Muslim, they get a little bit more radical and a little bit more radical. So it almost just seems as though we're importing the fight from Afghanistan to our own country.
Very astute.
Yes, and Lathan was talking about that. Again, on the Sharia law one, we point out that, and of course I do in my booklet, that there have been some people, and Peter Hammond being a good example, that when very few Muslims are in a country, they just talk about religious liberty and their rights. But as the percentages increase, they begin to want Sharia law. Then they begin to demand Sharia law, and when they have enough control, they implement Sharia law. And again, right now, the 9,000 Afghanis that got off the plane the other day at Dulles Airport are not going to overwhelm 300 plus million people, but it's still a real concern. And Lathan, you're the one talking about vetting, so it doesn't seem like we've been doing a real good job of vetting the people walking across the southern border. Are we doing any better on this one?
No.
No, not at all.
It's a mess. It's overwhelming. The groups that try to help refugees coming in, the housing. We've already got a housing problem in the U.S.
Yes.
And now they're trying to figure out how to house them, trying to figure out what you're going to do with them. And of course, the issue is you would expect that some of them, my guess is it'll be a very small percentage, but some of them are going to be bad actors and may end up moving into the various networks that are here that would like to do damage to us. So I think Martha's point of now we're importing the terrorist network and the war to the U.S. may end up being prescient in ways that we wish were not so.
And again, she was asking, well, when we find out a bad actor, what happens? Well, of course, first of all, they're not a actual citizen, so you may be able to remove them from the country. The precedent I have there would be some of the Somalis that have come into Minnesota. Our Minnesota listeners will understand that has been a concern, that some of the Somalis that settled there weren't exactly the kind of individuals. Again, we've had former people that were Somalis on this program even that are actually supportive of the United States. So I'm not saying that's as a group, but as individuals, some of them were actually involved in terrorist activities, some of which had even gone over and fought with ISIS. When we identified them, we said, no, we're going to send you back where you came from. You're not going to be allowed to stay in the United States. But how much of a will do you think Joe Biden or his administration have right now to actually deport individuals?
And of course, if we find out they're terrible people, we elect them to Congress.
Yes, we do have one Somali that's in Congress, don't we? And again, for those of you listening that are Somalis, we're not saying painting with a broad brush, but there are some that are very dangerous. Individuals that are in Afghanistan, many of these individuals that we're bringing out have actually performed very significant functions with the government. Some of them actually taught in the university. And I'm just terribly concerned about what that means for a country where you take some of the best and the brightest individuals out of it, and then you now just make this kind of a country run by the Taliban, which has borders to China on one side and Iran on the other,
and Pakistan on the other.
What does that look like?
I mean, these are lawless countries or countries with bad law that many of them don't really like, especially China and Iran. You've created a territory there where they can move through with sort of unimpeded and unnoticed. You'll have corruption in there, and of course the media's trying to make the case that the ISIS-K, the ones that committed the suicide bombing,
right,
these are enemies of the Taliban. No, they're just more radical than the Taliban. The Taliban used to be more radical, may still be radical. They're trying to put on a kinder, gentler Taliban now.
Yeah, they're concerned about climate change.
Yeah,
I saw that the other day. The spokesman for the Taliban.
They know how to talk our language. Right. They were talking about diversity and inclusion. They've been paying attention to all of this, and they know what liberals love to hear, so they just say that. And, of course, as the other, I think even today Biden said the Taliban's our partner. Well, realistically, they are, in a sense, because we've had to depend on the Taliban to keep enough control around the airport to be able to fly the people out. So there you go.
The thing is, if you're in foreign policy, you occasionally have to work with unseemly actors. That goes on occasionally.
For sure.
But you don't put them in power and then ask them permission to do various things. Which is what we've done here.
In just a few minutes, we'll probably get into a very good piece by Dr. Merrill Matthews about whether or not even Joe Biden is a secret weapon of the Republicans, because with all these disasters unfolding, it does suggest that Nancy Pelosi's days as Speaker of the House are few and far between. Of course, she wasn't going to run again anyway, because she knows pretty much Kevin McCarthy is going to be the next Speaker of the House.
But she had essentially, had cut a deal with the progressives that she would only run until, 2022 or 2024?
Yes.
And then she was going to step down at about like 84 or something like that. But
and they just took off, right? That's our second article here. They just said, we're getting out of Dodge.
And I am actually not upset with that. The less Congress is in, the safer I feel.
It's like the one we say, when Joe Biden or Barack Obama, anybody out playing golf, go do it. Go do it. We're all for it.
Please.
But just before I take a break, I do know that I want to hear Lathan talk about NATO, because I love this piece by Gary Bauer. Since Gary's not on with us today, I'll quote him. He said, remember all the huffing and puffing by our media and political elites about how Trump would offend and alienate our allies? Well, Joe Biden has actually done it. Many of our NATO allies stood with us in Afghanistan next to the United States. No nation sacrificed more men than our British allies. Incredibly, Joe Biden ignored calls for days, I think, if you're right. I didn't say it in here, from the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson as the situation in Afghanistan collapsed. Well, then you have one of the British members of Parliament who actually served in Afghanistan deliver this incredibly emotional speech in the House of Commons last week, and he blasted Joe Biden as our commander-in-chief for his shameful attacks on the Afghan army, saying those who have never fought for the colors they fly should be careful about criticizing those who have. And you have then the comments now. I won't go into all of this. You can read Gary Bauer's piece. What came from Macron at the French, German Chancellor Angela Merkel. I would think it would be fair to say that our NATO allies are not big fans of Joe Biden today.
Because they know now, or they don't know what's going to happen.
Yes.
Like there is an absolute vacuum of leadership. And I mean, power abhors a vacuum. Okay. If there's a vacuum in Afghanistan, I guarantee it's going to get filled either by China, Iran, Russia. But like it or not, America has been the world superpower for a while now, and our allies look to us. And when they look at this guy, and he ignores phone calls, he implements this absolute, I'm running out of words for it, disaster, debacle. There's several other probably words that I wouldn't say on the radio.
The FCC would appreciate it if you didn't.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They can't trust him, and I don't even think that they look at it as a matter of like he's an untrustworthy person. I think they don't have confidence in his ability.
Yeah.
Right.
To say nothing of the fact that he apparently, hasn't kept them in the loop. It's just a situation where when there's no one running the show, it's just chaos.
One of the reasons that our European allies got upset with Trump is because he tried to force them to spend more money on their own defense. He got angry with Angela Merkel for going forward with the Nord Stream 2 pipeline coming for Russia right now provides the majority of natural gas to Europe, and the pipeline is going to provide even more. And he thought you ought to be buying that natural gas from the U.S. and not depending upon Russia, which can oftentimes find, our pipeline had a break here. Now that you're opposed to our policy, we'll try to get that fixed as soon as the hard freeze is over there in Europe. They didn't like him pressing them to do things that they didn't really want to do, and now they've got somebody there who can't press them at all.
I have been behind what used to be the Iron Curtain a couple of times in the winter, and it's been really cold. And I say, why isn't the heat on? Well, the Russians haven't sent us the power to turn the heat on. And you realize who controls a lot of the world, even if technically on a map they don't control it. So that's really important. Well, we're going to take a break. When we come back, a couple of very good articles from Dr. Merrill Matthews, one about whether or not Joe Biden is actually doing more to help the Republicans. And then one on voter fraud, because now we do have a vote that took place in the Texas House to actually begin to bring about some changes in election law and some other comments. So we have a lot more to cover, not to mention all sorts of decisions coming down from the Supreme Court that I want Lathan to speak to. So we'll do all of that right after this.
The vaccine brought temporary relief from COVID anxiety. Now, as COVID's Delta variant spreads, Americans, vaccinated and unvaccinated, have been shaken out of any comfort zone we thought we had attained. Breakthrough cases were supposed to be rare, so it was jarring when it dawned on us that they're not. Breakthrough cases were also said to be mild and not readily spread, but the Centers for Disease Control's recent report on the Delta outbreak shows that vaccinated individuals with the virus carried as much of it in their noses as unvaccinated individuals. And as many young COVID victims land in hospitals, we have to wonder, is the Delta variant more virulent? Or could it be that there's a lot more of it out there and it's hitting some people hard, but is mild for most? No one knows the breakthrough rate. According to its own statement, as of May 1, 2021, the Centers for Disease Control transitioned from monitoring all reported vaccine breakthrough cases to, quote, focus on identifying and investigating only hospitalized or fatal cases. Wall Street Journal columnist Holman Jenkins points out that from the start, our mistake has been our strange reticence to recognize the reality of mild or symptomless COVID. Perhaps it's not so strange. Perhaps, for political reasons, those in charge of COVID policy really don't want us to know how much is out there. After all, Mr. Jenkins explains, overplaying the death risk and underplaying natural immunity helped to rally support for lockdowns, masking, and vaccine rollout compliance. Early in the pandemic, the CDC's webpage stated that every American should expect to get the virus eventually. This advice disappeared. Holman Jenkins suggests that accentuating how much viral spread remained unobserved apparently did not fit the agenda. We need more data. Vaccination is not a one-size-fits-all blunt instrument. We must also learn about how many Americans have contracted the virus and recognize the role natural immunity plays in this fight. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
After a few more minutes, we're going to look now at our third article. This one's written by Dr. Merrill Matthews, and as I just mentioned a minute ago, after the top of the hour, we'll come back and look at another article by Dr. Merrill Matthews, and then also just all sorts of legal issues that we will certainly discuss with Lathan Watts, one about the American Bar Association, also Supreme Court rulings on everything from immigration to the eviction moratorium, and a number of other topics. But Dr. Matthews, please, if nothing else, you say there are at least 4 major crises right now that have all been laid at the feet and created by, again, probably a better way to say it, by President Biden. And if Republicans are hoping to take the House and Senate, this is good news for them, isn't it?
It is good news for them. And we've pointed out many times that in the off-year election, the first off-year election, midterm election, the party outside of power typically gains seats and oftentimes takes control. That's typically the case. So you're sort of looking at this right now. Republicans are in charge of a lot of redistricting out there in the states. They'll probably take some seats from that. But now you've got Joe Biden's performance. So we're a long ways off. We're over a year off from the election. But if this continues, there will be a historic change in the voting pattern, I think, that will just dominate the House and the Senate for Republicans simply because of what's happening right now. So you have Afghanistan, where you've undermined every narrative Joe Biden's been trying to say. I'm the foreign policy expert. I'm the one who knows how to. I've traveled over the world many times, dealt with China and all these other countries. I know how to do this. Well, Joe, it looks like a disaster here, and you don't know how to do this. If the administration is hoping this thing will get off the front page. They even sort of implied we don't think Americans really care about Afghanistan. So as soon as we're out, that narrative will go away. Not with dead Marines and others out there, but at any rate, and with ISIS threats. But even if that goes off. COVID. Remember, Joe Biden campaigned against Donald Trump saying, I've got a plan. Donald Trump never had a plan. I've got a plan on day one when I come into the White House. I'm going to implement this plan and we're going to get this under control. Sort of looked like that was happening because he inherited the vaccines that were going and he did some things to help ramp those up. But we were seeing the cases drop. Now Delta variant's back. Thousands of Americans are dying, and it just looks like Joe Biden doesn't have a plan that he said he had. And then you've got immigration. If we get these things under control, you've got the southern border with near historic people coming across the southern border.
Yes.
And the refugees coming from Afghanistan sort of highlight the issue of immigration. It's not going away, Joe. And then you've got, if you get all this done, you've got the top, the Hill-Harris X poll showing that the top issue among the economy for Americans is inflation. And inflation numbers just came out. They're going up. The core dropped a little bit lower, but the core inflation, everybody sees this. So even if you think we'll get these Afghan pictures off the TV, everybody sees inflation when they're going to the store and they're having to pay more for gas, more for groceries, more for houses, more for everything. Where's the good news in this?
Again, when you recognize that last time, just phrases like defund the police were not good for your Democratic friends, you can see where this goes. So you've been involved in a lot of campaigns, Lathan Watts. If you were on one side or the other, I think right now you'd want to be on the Republican side rather than Democratic side.
Yes, but there's nobody more capable of snatching defeat from the jaws of victory.
I knew we'd hear that from you.
Yes, the Republican Party.
Yes.
I'm just telling you, like a year is a long time.
I know it is.
Yes, I mean, everything Dr. Matthews said is correct. Don't disagree with him on any of that. The only caveat I add is Republicans are really good at picking terrible candidates, especially when it looks like, hey, this is like a guaranteed win, right? So we can afford to put this lunatic in a sequin tie up for election, and then you end up losing. So yes, never underestimate the Republicans' ability to screw this up.
Right.
However, just as Dr. Matthews said, historically, the party out of power picks up seats in the first midterm. They don't have to pick up that many seats to take the House. The Senate,
I think Nancy Pelosi has like a 3-vote margin right now.
I know, it's just unbelievable how narrow that is.
You have to basically end up about +5, I think, in the House. You would obviously like to have a bigger margin, but in order to take the speakership, they need about a net +5 in the House. The Senate gets a little more interesting because even though it's 50-50 right now, roughly a third of the Senate is up every time, and of the seats that are up this time, it's about 20 of them are Republican seats up. So you have to defend all of those. You can't lose any of those. Then you got to pick off one or two of the Ds that are up to end up with a majority there. So it's important, just like you mentioned earlier, Kirby, some of the state legislatures that have put in some election reforms since the last election to make voting easy but cheating hard.
Yes.
In some of those races, where there were very, very thin margins, like the Senate races in Georgia and Arizona and other swing states, where I think those measures in place this time, all of this, paints a reason for the R's to be optimistic. But it's impossible to say what we'll be campaigning on a year from now.
It is hard.
Because just like Dr. Matthews said, if you fix this, there's still this other list of stuff. And who knows, what this president will discover to get us into in the next year. But, if you pick good candidates, if you stay, message discipline, yes, the R's, all of the things are lining up for them to take back the House, and I think the Senate as well. And I think if they just tell the American people, like, look at what's going on when they've had control of the White House and both houses of Congress, we can at least slow it down.
Yeah.
Gridlock can be a good thing.
Yes.
Right. It's like Dr. Matthews said, I never sleep better than when the government shut down. Like, okay, if there's gridlock, if the legislature is opposing a lot of these things that this president wants to do, then, maybe you can. Now, if you've only got one chamber of the legislature, it's very hard. But if you've got both of them, it's a little easier. So I think you'll hear a lot of that in the campaign.
What about a House of Representatives? I mean, if indeed they just came together long enough to vote for a $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill, a $3.5 trillion budget, at a time when we're complaining about the fact that we spent $2 trillion on a war that was eventually lost to the Taliban, I'm not sure I want to run on that in a congressional district.
And here's one of the things, one of the sidelines from this. Joe Biden being so criticized with this bad, these disasters that are going on, gives Democrats who want to challenge the Democratic scenario, the moderates, a little bit of wiggle room to be able to say, I'm going to fight Joe Biden. When the president is popular and everybody loves the president, it's harder to do that. So the Joe Manchins, the Kirsten Sinemas, and some others have a little more wiggle room to say, I'm not going to go along with this.
Yes. Well, we'll look at some of the candidates. I hear Herschel Walker's coming in studio, so I know he's good at running up and down the field. Now, what would be how he would run a political campaign? We'll find out, but we'll try to give you a chance to hear from a few of those individuals. And so, again, let me commend to you, because, of course, I just have the highest respect for both of these writers sitting across from me, but Dr. Merrill Matthews has written a very good piece on, again, those very significant challenges of Afghanistan, COVID-19, inflation, and immigration, and it is one of the articles in The Hill, and you can find it on our website. It's the third article, or in case you can also go to ipi.org. As a matter of fact, when we come back from the break, we'll get one of those that has been posted there on the issue of voter fraud. And we're going to talk about that because it has been interesting to look at some of the facts and figures and statistics there. And, of course, Lathan Watts will give us a good congressional and constitutional education. And so we'll have all that right after these important messages.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you've been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition. If you would like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. If you've already called in, hold on, because we certainly will take some of the phone calls related to last hour in terms of Afghanistan and President Joe Biden and what is happening maybe in Congress. But I did want to put at least another few articles on the table so that you can again comment on them as well. And that is, I think it is our fourth article, is about voter fraud, and it's a piece written by Dr. Merrill Matthews. By the way, Lathan Watts in studio as well. And if you've ever picked up my booklet on voter fraud, which we wrote before the general election, we were just simply pointing out at the time that if you look at the various databases put together by John Fund, well, actually mostly by Hans von Spakovsky, and Dr. Merrill Matthews and I both at different times have interviewed those individuals, that they're just at the Heritage Foundation had more than 1,300 examples of voter fraud. So when people say there's no voter fraud, that's disingenuous. But the article by Dr. Merrill Matthews goes into more detail. But before we do, let's give people a little bit of a historical update. Of course, Georgia has passed a lot of these election reform bills. Just last night, the Texas House, which has had some difficulty getting some of the members to actually stay around in town.
Several of them went on a D.C. vacation on a private plane with beer and no mask, and they ended up catching COVID.
And so that is the case. But nevertheless, the debate was taking place on what's called SB 1. It actually came from the Senate, which was substituted for the House bill. Now it has to go back to the Senate. But it does look as if some of the restrictions that were actually in place before all the COVID examples were allowing for 24-hour voting and all sorts of other things will be actually limited. And it brings us, Dr. Merrill Matthews, to your piece on this vote by the House of Representatives and also the votes in Georgia and many other states, because as you point out here, we've been hearing for some time that there's no evidence of widespread voter fraud, but you point out that that is oftentimes used to say there is no voter fraud.
Right. And if our listeners will pay attention when they're hearing media and others talk about this, they'll start out by saying there's no evidence of widespread voter fraud, and then the rest of the conversation addresses it as if there is no voter fraud. But there absolutely is voter fraud out there, and it's been around for a while. I think virtually every state experiences in some way. But there is voter fraud. And, of course, Attorney General Ken Paxton of Texas, he has set up on his website, the Attorney General's website, he tracks this just to let you know the kind of cases that are. So I'm citing from the Texas Attorney General's website, 534 cases successfully prosecuted election fraud offenses against 155 individuals since 2005. There's also 510 cases, current cases right now, against 43 defendants, and 386 currently active election fraud investigations. So there's several hundred investigations. There's 510 current cases that are pending, and then 534 that have been successfully prosecuted since 2005. So that's a lot of cases. Now, a lot of those probably will be innocent or dropped for some reason or other. Might be somebody who just made a mistake. They were maybe they were in the wrong precinct or something of that nature. But they're looking at these, and of course, there was a case of over 100 in Texas brought a case against a lady who worked for essentially a nursing home. Over 100 cases where she was apparently taking around these votes and getting seniors who may or may not have been competent to sign the thing. She was essentially harvesting ballots for them and then turning them in. So we'll see what happens in that case. But most of the cases, I think it's fair to say most cases tend to be fairly small and either one or two, a handful of votes. Sometimes you get into the range of 50 or 100 votes or so, but it's usually smaller numbers of votes, but it's out there.
I love the title. Voter fraud is real. Just ask dead voters. No representation without respiration is
That's
what
right.
I always say.
And that actually comes from a New York Post story, and that covers Republicans.
Yes.
And that's on a Long Island
Staten
race.
Island.
Staten Island, right. Yeah. That's going on. And this is two Republicans going back and forth against each other, with one of them claiming that there was voter fraud with a number of votes there, one of which was a dead person. Now, we often attribute dead votes going to Democrats, but occasionally a dead person may vote for a Republican. It does happen.
Well, and again, we are in the state of Texas, and in 1948, you have Landslide Lyndon.
Yes.
And you had in one particular precinct, everybody voted in perfect alphabetical order, which I thought was quite interesting. So to say that this never happens is really straining credulity. But if nothing else, Lathan, that's why we do have these particular investigations, because we do believe voter fraud does take place.
Of course. And it's like, I mean, you can't eliminate it altogether. People are always, if there's a system that can be cheated, people are going to try to cheat it. But that doesn't absolve you of the responsibility to try and eliminate it. And that's what these things the Texas House just passed, and the things that other states like Georgia have passed are an attempt to do, to make it harder to cheat. So if you've ever worked, in the elections process, if you've been like an election judge or, a precinct chair for your party or whatever, it can be hard to find people to watch polls. Now, how easy do you think it's going to be to fill the graveyard shift at the polls? Because one of the things I don't like is this bill in Texas gets rid of 24-hour-a-day voting. Well, if you can't find people to watch that precinct in the middle of the night, guess when the cheaters are going to show up? I mean, it's not rocket science, right? I mean, it's the things they don't like, getting rid of 24-hour-a-day voting, getting rid of ballot harvesting.
None of which was allowed before the 2020 election in Texas.
Exactly. The people that are opposing this bill, the people that left Austin for D.C., just like you said, they all got elected without this stuff that they say that they're opposed to. They didn't need all this stuff to get elected, so you're telling me somebody else does? So, yeah, I mean, these are really pretty common sense reforms that, frankly, should have been in place before. In the last election cycle, a lot of states made changes to what you can do during the election under the guise of, because COVID. And, a lot of those changes were made by, none of them, I don't think, were made by legislatures, which is what
there you go.
The Constitution demands. So all of those things should have been challenged before a vote was cast.
And some were in Pennsylvania, and the Supreme Court sort of just said, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court said, go ahead with it. What the heck?
So now states, some of the states who saw what happened last time, and whether or not you think, it was enough votes to sway an election, if it casts doubt on the election, that's not good for democracy. And so they're putting things in place to try to make at least the impression that your vote, you can trust that your vote will count, and it won't be discounted by some guy voting twice or cheating.
Let's take a break and let's take some phone calls. We'll come back and get some that are from last hour, but also maybe you have some thoughts about voter fraud or these various election reform bills. We certainly want to get your comments about that. And so we'll pick up a couple of those phone calls. Also, while we're talking about voter ID, got a great line that I want to get maybe some reaction from Lathan on. And then we'll also get into some issues about the Constitution, some decisions coming down from the Supreme Court that you need to know about. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
A frequent phrase used these days is that we need to trust the science. But I found that often trust the science really means trust the model, which is not the same thing. Computer models are used to predict everything from the climate to the economy. Often they are inaccurate. Asking legitimate questions about these models and their assumptions is appropriate and not anti-science. When I was in graduate school, many of us worked with professors who developed computer models attempting to understand more about the environment. These models helped me learn two valuable lessons. First, you need good data for the model to accurately predict the future. No doubt you've seen the word GIGO, which stands for garbage in, garbage out. If the data you have for a pandemic model comes from China or Iran, you may not have good data. Second, a good model also needs to be based upon accurate assumptions. If you can't account for the impact of mitigation procedures, you're going to come to scary conclusions about the infection rate and the death rate. Should we have skepticism about the models used to predict the future? Well, the climate models that were developed back in the 1990s predicted rising temperatures. Instead, we had a warming hiatus that lasted for nearly a decade and a half. Global temperatures essentially remain flat. The Congressional Budget Office is given the responsibility of estimating the impact of legislation on federal revenue, but often is limited in the assumptions they can use. For example, if a tax reform bill reduces taxes, the CBO score assumes that lower taxes mean lower tax revenue. But individual investors and consumers react to lower taxes by investing more and spending more. Lower taxes might actually generate more revenue. Often, trust the science really means trust the model, but we have lots of evidence that sometimes the models are wrong. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you hear on Viewpoints by visiting pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back on again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Lathan Watts, Dr. Merrill Matthews. Let's head out to Florida first. And Rick, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, thank you, Kerby, for taking my call. I'd just like to start off by saying that my prayers and thoughts go out to the families of those who lost their lives yesterday and also all during this debacle, what I call a goat rodeo. It's just a mess. I don't know that what this might have been a planned thing that somebody is planning. President Biden compared to President Trump is a globalist. He's about the world, where President Trump is about America. Just look at the slogans: "Make America Great," and Biden's slogan, "Build Back Better." President Trump emphasizes what's best for America, and President Biden does not. I mean, they condone burning the flag or whatever they want to do. But I think that he's not really making the decisions. I mean, if you look at it, he can't even make a decision yesterday on who to call on. He said, let me see, it says here that I'm supposed to call on.
Oh, I know that one. Yeah, you saw that the other day where it says, okay, I'm supposed to call on first of all. And then you see the teleprompter and it says leave after he finishes. And it's in different color because he's afraid that he's going to say the word leave while he's reading off the teleprompter. I mean, somebody's making that decision. And it's even more scary if he's the one making those decisions, right?
Yeah.
That's right.
We talk about this idea of make America first. The Democrats used to have this idea. I remember in the 1984 Republican convention, my former teacher talked about the fact that the San Francisco Democrats blame America first, but that was a little bit different than make America first. So you do have that kind of mindset. But nevertheless, I guess Rick brought it up. Are we, I think, finally to the point where most people, even people working for MSNBC and CNN, are acknowledging that something is not right with this president?
Well, Rick's point is that Biden was more concerned about the globe than he was about the U.S. He's failing in that. The globe has gotten worse, yes. and our ally, the whole notion of we're going to reestablish our allies and work well with them, it has all gone to pot right now.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to be a globalist, then you have to sort of have pretty good relationships with your allies.
Yes,
right, and he's alienated them over this whole situation.
And the main thing is now the Taliban is now our ally.
There's something seriously wrong with this.
We're working better with the Taliban than we are with Germany and England and.
We'll get into some other things, but I just had to pull this up just for nothing else to hear from our snarky parenthetical here, because here you have, at a time, and I'll just read it, when Taliban has taken control of Afghanistan, President Biden issued a statement celebrating Women's Equality Day by talking about the fact that women in America are still oppressed by voter ID laws. I'm not making this up. So at a time when you recognize how awful it's going to be for women in Afghanistan, they're not going to get to vote. They're not going to get to go to school. Many of them will be married off to the Taliban fighters.
Are being married off. I mean, it's already started.
Yes, already happened. The big issue for President Biden is to talk about the fact that requiring a photo ID is oppressing women in the United States.
Sometimes you got to laugh to keep from crying. I mean, it's like he's a walking Babylon Bee article. Like the guys of Babylon Bee and not the Bee and all these other guys are probably just over the moon because they don't even it's not even work anymore. It's just what did he say today? Yeah. Put that in quotes. Run it on the website.
Actually, Lathan's point's well taken because I've seen a few headlines which I thought. I had to go look to see if it was Babylon Bee, and no, it was actually
or the
USA
Onion.
Today or CNN
right.
or something.
Exactly. I mean, you're making statements about photo ID is going to keep women from voting.
Yes. I've always heard it was supposed to hurt people that are minorities, but now women. And again, just imagine if a Republican said that, because the implication would be that you say women aren't smart enough to get a photo ID. I mean, can you imagine the firestorm would come down? But they all say, well, that's just Joe.
But we talked earlier about the Bay of Pigs incident. You and I were old enough to know what was going on there. We also saw images of the civil rights movement with marchers being hit with hoses, dogs, and everything else. And so now you had a number of Texas House Democrats fly in private jets to Washington, staying in swanky hotels, calling this a new civil rights movement. And they get away with it. And the irony here is the civil rights movement that we saw back in the early 60s, it was Democrats that were stopping that. I mean, that was Democrats who were being the oppressors at the time. You just can't make some of this stuff up.
And again, when it's called Jim Crow 2.0, you think, okay, when Joe Biden did it, well, he was running as a candidate, so all sorts of things are said that probably later on further reflection shouldn't have been said in the heat of a campaign. But you have people repeating it again and again and again and again. Yeah. And this idea of a photo ID is somehow very controversial to a good number of individuals that call themselves Democrats.
And, of course, there's voter ID and photo ID, and generally they have been put together. I mean, generally a photo ID and a voter ID was sort of the same thing. And, of course, Democrats have long opposed, they would argue, voter ID. And then they came up here recently, Stacey Abrams, Raphael Warnock, and saying, we've never been against voter ID. We're against photo ID. But voter ID, we've always been for. I don't know anybody who's opposed to voter ID. We can probably find a number of your statements a few years ago saying that.
Well, again, if you want to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Lathan?
Yeah, you have the audacity to call these things Jim Crow laws when, as Dr. Matthews points out, it was your party that passed the original Jim Crow laws, the real ones.
Right.
And then when the Texas D's, basically take their toys and go home because they don't want to do their job.
Or go to
D.C. Go to D.C. And they're greeted by the vice president who equated them with the people who marched in Selma.
Yeah, and I had a neighbor that marched in Selma. I had a Sunday school teacher that marched in Selma. So, I mean, I can relate to that. Just I'm old enough around the table to remember that. And then to say that's the same thing is just unconscionable.
It's an insult to anybody who did march in Selma. It's historically ignorant. This just like... The V in VP should stand for vapid. Okay, she's the emptiest pantsuit I've ever seen in D.C., which is why she's nowhere to be found.
Yes,
like we talked about this before. People are talking about,
where's the vice president? Yes.
Yeah, well, there's a reason
where she can do the least damage.
Exactly. There's
where
a
she
reason
casts the deciding vote in a 50-50 Senate, which will change, I think, as well. So anyway, just some good points. When we come back from the break, I do want to talk about the Supreme Court and some decisions and all of that. But just real quickly around the round table, we've had a problem in Texas and in Wisconsin and a little bit in Oregon where when one party, and in two of those it was Democrats, in Oregon, to be fair, it was a Republican, when I don't have the votes, I'm just going to leave to prevent you from having a quorum. And every time this happens, they eventually come back and it's kind of no harm, no foul. It does seem to me that if a governor, in this case it would be Governor Greg Abbott, doesn't do something or vacate the election or fine them, we're going to have more of that, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And whether they do it in another special session this summer or if they wait until the next time they're back in, they should, the Republicans in Austin who control the majority in all the statewide offices, they should pass a law, not a rule of the House, a law that says any representative elected to this legislature who is absent for more than 48 hours is deemed to have vacated his seat, and there will be an immediate special election to fill it. This
That'll change it, don't you think?
It would. I would give, except with a note from the doctor.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I've got to get a hall pass or something like that.
You got to get a hall pass.
But the problem is a lot of these state constitutions were written at a time when there was a fear that some small group of good old boys would pass legislation. So they required that you had a quorum of the entire membership rather than those president.
Right.
And when our Constitution is not based on that because they assume that people would want to serve.
Right.
And so we've got a problem with some of these constitutions which allow individuals, and Wisconsin is a good example, and Texas has been a recurrent example, and it's going to happen in other states too. If we don't penalize this, it's going to happen again and again. Because we know that if you reward bad behavior, what do you get? More bad behavior. You get more bad behavior. That generated some phone calls, so we'll get some of those calls after the break. But we're also going to depend on Lathan to give us a little bit of an understanding on a couple of these Supreme Court cases that you need to know about. We really haven't talked about it because we've been waiting for our representative from First Liberty to come in and educate us. So we're going to do Constitution 101. And maybe talk about the American Bar Association before we're done. That's another article we've posted. But I see that we've got a number of you that want to talk about everything from IDs, vaccines, and a variety of other topics. So, hey, we can get into that, And if that's a good point, if I'm supposed to show an ID for this and not for this, what about that? I think there's some good questions there. So we'll get into that right after these important messages.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Merrill Matthews and Lathan Watts, and we'll go to South Carolina, WLPE. David, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to make a comment about the photo ID. I mean, if he wants everybody to get COVID shots, but it takes a photo ID to get a COVID shot.
Yeah, I had to produce a photo ID for it.
Yeah, well,
absolutely.
There you go. So again, just I made the list, and we can go through that again, but I don't want to bore people of all the things that you have to show a photo ID for, and some of them are like cold medicine and things of that nature. And so to then say that individuals can't produce a photo ID is just hard for me to accept.
It's hard, and you know, it's interesting. They required the photo ID on when I got the vaccination, even though it's not like they would have refused me because I was here illegally or anything, because everybody gets the free shot. So I'm not entirely sure why they wanted the photo ID, other than they filled out my little card for that.
Filled out your card, yeah. So they don't want people to fraudulently use those cards.
Sure.
Now, if you fraudulently vote, that's not a problem.
Because it doesn't happen.
Yeah, because it just never happens. I'm going to keep moving down here because we've got a lot of phone calls. So, Prosper, Texas. Fred, you are on. Thank you for calling today.
Yes, Kirby, thank you. Good afternoon, gentlemen. A little piece of information I learned a couple of days ago about the Republican Party. The Republican Party of Texas was formed on July 4th, 1897, that's after the Civil War, in Houston, Texas, by a group of 150 black and 20 white Texans. Very impressive. And now we have the possibility of Alan West becoming governor. I think that's a really great piece of progress. And talk about progress, I'm really glad to see the election integrity bill has come so far, and we're almost there.
All good points. And we've talked about this before, but it's worth mentioning that some of the first Republicans elected in the South after the Civil War were African American.
And it's David Barton, right? Is that
yes,
yeah.
David Barton.
And he's got a book on that. I read it several years ago, and he goes through and lists a number of these who were elected to Congress. And the state houses right after the Civil War, and they were able to get the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments, I think it was. The Republican Party was largely a black party in the South early on. And then there was a time, I think, that Martin Luther King Jr. was sort of Republican sympathies. I don't know if that was true at the end of his life, but my understanding is when he was going through school and early in his life, that would have been the case, because a lot of blacks felt like Republicans helped them.
And again, that's David Barton, Wall Builders. You can go to Wall Builders and find that. We have a very good article and a video that goes with that. But I also got my resident historian here. And Lathan Watts, again, that is something that most people don't know. You talk to a younger person, they would think that the Republican Party's always been anti-black, and it was not, certainly going all the way back to Abraham Lincoln. And they think Democrats have always been supportive of the African Americans. And yet most of the Jim Crow laws and almost all of Reconstruction, those were all Democrats, weren't they?
Yeah, they were, and that's why they've invented this myth since then that, well, the party's switched. And you hear them talk about it all the time, because somebody will bring this up, and they go, well, but that was the old, then the party's, then they switched, and that's why, Republicans are now the white supremacists or whatever. Only one of the Democrats who filibustered the Civil Rights Act,
Strom Thurmond,
switched parties.
Yes.
The rest of them remained Democrats their entire lives.
And Dinesh D'Souza has that in his book as well.
Yeah, exactly. The Republican Party didn't control a majority of U.S. House representative districts in the South until 1994. Okay, so if there was a switch, if you believe that over time the South has become less and less racist, if you want to use that term, then it has done so as it has become more and more Republican.
I went back and counted. This has been 2 or 3 years ago. My recollection is that more Republicans voted for the Civil Rights Bill, the 1964 Civil Rights Act, than Democrats.
And again, if you say, wait a minute, I got a bunch of white guys saying this, okay, go to Carol Swain, who is at Vanderbilt. She's African-American. You can go see all the documentation. Dinesh D'Souza goes through that. And so the so-called big switch is the biggest myth being used right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, again, just wanted to put a few more of those facts on the table. Fred, thank you so much.
He got it exactly right.
I want to get a few more phone calls, and then want to get to Lathan talking about what's going on in the Supreme Court. But we'll go to William in South Carolina. William, you have the floor.
Well, hello, and I wanted to say to you, Kerby, your staff, and your guests, thank you for what my family considers objective, neutral, balanced, through the lens of God's Word, news and views. We don't know what we would do. We really appreciate the balance that you bring, and thank you. We pray for you. We support, and God bless you, and by all means, keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so very much.
You're welcome.
That's such a nice endorsement. I might even use it on Truth Team because it was so well done. Okay, we even my mom would think that was pretty good, so that would be fun. Let's take a couple of issues. I will go one after another. So Lathan, we're going to put you on the spot. First of all, the Supreme Court ruled 6-3 that indeed this extending the moratorium, which was done by President Biden, who at the time admitted that there's probably no justification for this moratorium on evictions, is unconstitutional. And it originally came from the Centers for Disease Control, which last time I looked at my Constitution, I don't think is a lawmaking body. So help us out with this.
You can't find the Centers for Disease Control in the Constitution.
How did this even happen?
Yeah, I almost have to give him credit for trying. It takes some guts to say the Center for Disease Control can decide, you can't collect rent.
And then extend it again, and then again, and then again.
And again. And
what's astonishing, and the last extension after they had gotten the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court by Justice Kavanaugh, I think it was, who went along with the majority saying, well, it's going to end July 31st anyway, so we'll let it do. And so Biden decided
and there you have it. What's astonishing about that opinion is there's actually 3 votes against it.
Yes, and again, just is bothersome to even see Breyer's attempt at trying to come up with some argument against that.
So let me add the one other thing here. There has been billions of dollars set aside in the federal government to help people make these payments. But in the several news stories out, the Democrats are aware of it, they've been so bad at getting the money out. I think there's something like they've gotten out like 10% or 15% of the dollars they have.
Said $47 billion, now $3 billion, but it could be up to $4 billion now.
Yeah, and so they've gotten that. If they had gotten the money out, a lot of these people would not have been evicted.
Right.
But because the government, which now wants you to give them power, $3.5 trillion to be able to disperse to people, could not do this one program right. So give us $3.5 trillion to be able to not give out.
Oh, again, if you've ever stood in line in a particular motor vehicle line or maybe VA or others, you recognize that's the case. Back then, the numbers we used back then were $3 billion out of the $47 billion, some allocated under the Trump administration, some allocated under the Biden administration, either was sitting in Washington, D.C., or, this is even a greater tragedy, some sitting in the coffers of some of the states that didn't get it out either, which...
And I've seen news stories, people begging to try to get that, and they can't seem to get it, in part because of red tape and other things.
Didn't you write a book years ago about fraud and Medicare?
I did.
I think you got a
chapter in the book.
Yeah, you got a chapter in the book. I think you're going to have a chapter on just fraud as it relates to the evictions. Anyway, just before we take a break, the other one has to do with the argument that if you want to come into this country, you need to stay in Mexico before you come across the border. And the individual that ruled that, you happen to know.
Yeah, so this there was a lawsuit brought in federal district court because Biden just basically arbitrarily reversed the policy of Trump. I know that shocks everybody because that seems to be the only thing he's interested in doing.
Yes.
Trump had instituted, by regulation,
right? Executive order, all that.
Exactly. Remain in Mexico, and interpreting that statute and the standard of of statutory interpretation and what you can do and what you can't do. Judge Kaczmarek said, this doesn't meet the smell test, and ruled against them, which basically put the Remain in Mexico policy back in place.
And Matthew Kaczmarek, who ruled against the Biden administration.
He did. He was former deputy general counsel at First Liberty. But let me tell you this about Matthew. Matthew is not, as a jurist, an ideologue. Matthew decided that case on the law.
On the law.
That's what he's sworn
and we need
in
more
to do.
of those kind of people
Absolutely.
in the judiciary, not talking about their preference, but
he is
what
the
is
exact kind of
constitutional.
judge you want in that position. And Biden appealed, went all the way up to SCOTUS, and SCOTUS upheld it.
Yes. Nothing else. Somebody came from First Liberty, you and Kelly Shackelford and others. We come back. American Bar Association attacks academic freedom. We'll talk about that right after this.
The vaccine brought temporary relief from COVID anxiety. Now, as COVID's Delta variant spreads, Americans, vaccinated and unvaccinated, have been shaken out of any comfort zone we thought we had attained. Breakthrough cases were supposed to be rare, so it was jarring when it dawned on us that they're not. Breakthrough cases were also said to be mild and not readily spread. But the Centers for Disease Control's recent report on the Delta outbreak shows that vaccinated individuals with the virus carried as much of it in their noses as unvaccinated individuals. And as many young COVID victims land in hospitals, we have to wonder, is the Delta variant more virulent? Or could it be that there's a lot more of it out there and it's hitting some people hard, but is mild for most? No one knows the breakthrough rate. According to its own statement, as of May 1, 2021, the Centers for Disease Control transitioned from monitoring all reported vaccine breakthrough cases to, quote, focus on identifying and investigating only hospitalized or fatal cases. Wall Street Journal columnist Holman Jenkins points out that from the start, our mistake has been our strange reticence to recognize the reality of mild or symptomless COVID. Perhaps it's not so strange. Perhaps, for political reasons, those in charge of COVID policy really don't want us to know how much is out there. After all, Mr. Jenkins explains, overplaying the death risk and underplaying natural immunity helped to rally support for lockdowns, masking, and vaccine rollout compliance. Early in the pandemic, the CDC's webpage stated that every American should expect to get the virus eventually. This advice disappeared. Holman Jenkins suggests that accentuating how much viral spread remained unobserved apparently did not fit the agenda. We need more data. Vaccination is not a one-size-fits-all blunt instrument. We must also learn about how many Americans have contracted the virus and recognize the role natural immunity plays in this fight. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. We'll stay on some of these legal issues, and then I want to go around the round table, talk about what's available at First Liberty Institute and the Institute for Policy Innovation. But Lathan and I, earlier in the week, saw that the American Bar Association has actually made as a condition of accreditation for law schools, requiring law schools to provide education in bias, cross-cultural competency, and racism. If you read my latest little booklet here on critical race theory, you recognize that those are some of the buzzwords, and I have a whole section here of some of the buzzwords for critical race theory and some of the assumptions and euphemisms. So if you are not familiar with this, this is basically saying we think we need to be spending money with Ibram X. Kendi, Henry Rogers is his real name, and some of the others, Robin DiLangelo and all the rest. So now, if you're going to be accredited, and every law school wants to be accredited, you now have to for sure teach critical race theory, which occasionally has been taught in the law schools, going all the way back to the teaching in the University of Oregon. But this does not bode well for the future of legal education.
No, and I think it's high time that some right-thinking attorneys start devising a legal strategy to go after the ABA. There's already been a lawsuit against the Texas bar by a guy named Josh Hammer and a couple other attorneys that basically he was against the Texas bar using his dues to support a bunch of liberal causes that he doesn't support, much like the Janus decision out of the Supreme Court for union dues, and those guys won against the Texas bar, and I think it's time for attorneys across America to do the same thing to the ABA, because they do have a monopoly when it comes to accreditation on law schools. Just like you said, if you graduated from an unaccredited law school, good luck getting a job. Mm-hmm. I honestly, just my personal opinion about the legal profession, I think it was. I think there is merit in the idea of returning to an apprenticeship model for attorneys. That most attorneys in private practice are not generalists. They don't do a little bit of everything, right? They find something that they like and they do a lot of that, or they find something they're particularly good at. The law is very nuanced. It's very technical on some things. And so you typically hone in on something that you're interested in or that you're good at or that you find you can, support yourself doing. And that's what you specialize in. In the old way, the apprenticeship model would have been if I wanted to work, for you as an attorney, I would come to work for you. I would apprentice under you, just like a craftsman apprentice. Mm-hmm. I would learn from you, and then you would basically vouch for me with the legal community. I would start working for you, and then that's how you got into it. Wasn't until we started formalizing, all of these things like with bar exams and all of the bar exam tests you on everything. Very few attorneys, very few actually practice in all areas of the law. First liberty, we only do religious liberty, right. And there's plenty of it. Okay, it touches a lot of areas of the law. That's why we only do that, because there's not enough hours in the day for us to do the other stuff. Just on constitutional questions, we just handle that one part of the First Amendment. But yeah, the ABA.
They also rate your various nominees as well qualified, qualified, or not qualified. And when they start saying these people are not qualified, when we all look at them and say, no, wait a minute, they're qualified.
And that's the issue that has really, I think, done the most to damage their credibility.
Yes.
Because it's been clear on some of these judges, they just don't like their interpretation of the Constitution, as a textualist or an originalist or whatever. And on that front, I think folks that vote on judges in the judiciary committees have been giving them less and less power over that. They're putting less and less stock in what the ABA thinks of this person. They're putting more in, what other organizations in the legal community think of this person as a potential jurist, because they do see the ABA as an ideological organization. They are not neutral. As evidenced by now they want to teach CRT and other things in law schools. Not good for the profession.
Anyway, that's one of the articles we posted. I thought we'd go around the roundtable real quickly, though, and talk about some of the resources that are available. And if you go to the Institute for Policy Innovation, you're going to find a couple of the columns and pieces by not only Dr. Merrill Matthews, but his colleagues. But you also have a section here on vaccine mandates, who can and who can't. And so both of these institutions, both First Liberty and IPI, are talking about that. So talk about some of the things that are available at the Institute for Policy Innovation. And I encourage people to support you because it's a great organization.
Well, we have a number of articles that we publish, and so it covers a range of different things, from health policy to welfare to tax policy to technology and information communication policy. So a number of things up there. Plus, we do occasional Zoom meeting that anybody can go and sign up free and listen to. We've got one coming up. We did one this past week on free speech and the internet and large tech companies.
Right.
And because we had Senator Brian Hughes, I think it is, from Texas, who is wanting to move legislation to try to rein in some of the things the tech companies are doing. And we had some other people from other legislators from other states who are opposed to that approach. And then we've got one coming up in a couple of weeks on the housing market from an American Enterprise Institute scholar. And I think we're calling what's going on with the housing market or something like that. So we've actually got a lot of people signing up for that. It's a number of real estate companies who've jumped in there. We never talk with real estate companies, but they're signing up for it. So a lot of things. It's all available free for people to go and consume and share.
We also have things at First Liberty, and there's a whole series of websites. So since we were talking about your video just the other day, First Liberty Live was with Keisha Russell on the battle for freedom in the schools, school choice. And if you go to First Liberty Live, which is different than firstliberty.org,
Correct.
you can find some of those videos that are available and some great interviews. Kaylee McEnany was on last week, I think.
Last week.
Yes.
So firstlibertylive.com, you can watch those videos. Speaking of the vaccine and the questions on
You've
vaccines,
got those too?
We have, I think in the last 2 weeks, we've had in excess of 900 calls to our office about vaccines. That's not hyperbole. We're actually keeping track. Because we're getting so many calls, we came up with basically a toolkit for people who want to request an exemption or an accommodation, and it basically kind of teaches you how to request it. There's some templates in there, whether you're in a private employer, government employee, military, and so if you go to firstliberty.org and at the top click Get Legal Help, tell us what's going on. If it's related to you want an exemption for a vaccine, we'll get you that toolkit, and then you can do it.
And as a matter of fact, if you go to firstliberty.org, the first thing that pops up says, seeking a religious exemption from COVID-19 vaccine mandates, download our free toolkit. So there it is.
Exactly.
So if you click past that, then you will see that there's something else, and that is one more website, a Supreme Court coup, and that's another issue of trying to pack the Supreme Court. So you got that as well.
Yeah, we're collecting signatures on a petition that will go to President Biden's so-called Reform Commission, which had already decided what the reform was going to be before they had the first meeting, as they want to suggest adding 4 seats to the Supreme Court. But they did say they wanted public input. So we're on a mission to get 1 million signatures against it to deliver. So you can go there and sign up.
So again, if all that came real fast and you're saying, I couldn't write fast enough, the bottom line is just simply go to pointofview.net. We have the links to IPI.org, firstliberty.org, and that is certainly the case. You might want to know what's going on next week. Well, we got Michael Knowles. I think some of you know who Michael Knowles is. We've got Robert Jeffers. We've got a who's who of individuals next week that we'll be talking to. So I hope that you will take the time to visit the website, pointofview.net. Go to our website. You'll find Penna Dexter's commentary. Mine throughout the week are there as well. The links to the 2 websites. And if you want to listen to this again or find some of the links to the articles, it's all available at pointofview.net. As always, I want to thank Andrew, but especially today, thank Ivy for their help behind the scenes. Have a great weekend, and we look forward to seeing you Monday right here on Point of View.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.